why some people scream at spiders while others hold tarantulas like pets, or why public speaking feels like a life or death situation for some while others love the spotlight. Phobias are basically your brain over-the-top security system freaking out over things that usually aren't dangerous. But how did our brains get so paranoid? And why does avoiding fear only make us stronger? Buckle up, we're driving into wild psychology of phobias. I'm Cari.
And I'm Hannah.
And this is our guest, Dr. Miller.
This is your camera.
Oh.
Yes, you have a camera right here. I should have said that.
I was looking at Cheyenne the whole time during that. I did not mean to.
Yeah, I always make eye contact with Cheyenne. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, oh, wait, Cheyenne is the audience.
This is our guest, Dr. Miller. He's one of the psychology professors here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Robert Miller. I'm a developmental psychologist who specializes in developmental psychopathology, which is the link between like how we develop psychological disorders. So it kind of rides the middle line between abnormal psychology and developmental psychology.
Cool.
You talk a little bit about your education, what brought you to Lyon?
Yeah, so I got my PhD at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. And then I came to Lyon about 8 years ago, I want to say. It's maybe not quite 8. I think it's 8 this fall. So between 7 and 8 years ago. So it's been a while. I came in 2018.
2018 was 8 years ago?
Well, it's close. Maybe next year will be my 8th year.
Okay.
Oh. So 7 years.
That's
7
so
years.
weird.
Yeah. It's been a while, certainly.
Okay, so we brought Dr. Miller on today because he has a class called Psychology of Horror, and he has discussed before he is interested in all things horror and scary. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that kind of interest?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about Psych of Horror. So Psychology of Horror is one of our Core 100 classes. So we've got a series of first-year seminars, different topics for different professors, and usually you kind of pick something that you're personally enthusiastic about. So I do really like horror movies and decided to kind of merge those two things together. So in this case, we talk about a little bit of everything. We talk about like what makes horror scary. We talk about, different techniques in horror films. And of course, we talk about like the neurobiology of fear quite a bit as well. We do a little bit of discussion of phobias as well.
Mm-hmm. I had the privilege of being Dr. Miller's last semester to be his student one mentor. And I was also in that class freshman year. So I know a little bit about phobias, and it also sparked my interest in phobia, so much so that that's what I wrote my psychology paper over last year for Dr. Sonia. I made a pretty good grade too, so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I don't know anything about it, so this is kind of like a fun crash course for me. I was actually really excited about this episode.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about was our own phobias, if we have any. So what is a phobia? We should start by saying that.
Yeah, I was about to say, what classifies a phobia? Because I got some like was that? Well, I guess a phobia would be an irrational fear.
Yeah, so a phobia is an intense, disproportionate fear of like a specific thing. The disorder is actually called a specific phobia, and so it could be an object, it could be an animal or a particular situation. And so you have first of all, you have an intense, immediate fear of that thing when you encounter it, and sometimes anticipatory fear as well. So just like thinking about encountering that thing will kind of scare you. Mm-hmm. That fear has to be disproportionate. So it's you are more frightened of it than you should be given the amount of danger it actually poses, right? So, if you encounter a bear on a hike and you're scared of that bear, that's not a phobia, right? Because that's a dangerous situation. If, however, right, you've got this intense fear of spiders, and anytime you see a spider, you have that really intense reaction, even though the majority of spiders you encounter are not going to be venomous. They're not going to be dangerous to you. And, even if they were, they're not going to like get near you. Right? Mm-hmm. It's a pretty specific situation where you'd actually be injured by one. That might be a phobia, right? Especially if, for example, it's something that is persistent, meaning it's 6 or more months that you encounter this. Maybe you do things like avoid situations where you encounter that feared stimuli or that phobic stimuli. So there's like active avoidance, which means maybe you you don't go in places where you think spiders might be. Or maybe you've got a phobia of like, riding in an elevator. And so you avoid getting in the elevator, you always take the stairs, right? Those sorts of things. And additionally, it has to actually cause either intense distress or impairment in some way, right? You can't do things that you would otherwise do because of that phobia.
Yeah, so basically a phobia, like to wrap that all into one, a phobia is like an irrational fear that you do not encounter in your daily life that causes an anxiety in your brain, and it causes your brain to make your body react to it. So some way I know how to explain it is you looked at a little spider, and your prefrontal cortex is like, oh, that's just a little spider, it's not gonna hurt me. But then your amygdala is like, that's gonna kill me. So then you're like, okay, I gotta get away from this. And that's basically what a phobia is. Anxiety is over stuff that probably you're not going to encounter. So yeah. So the main 3 things that I saw whenever I was Googling phobias was specific things, social thinking, so like things like social anxiety, fear of speaking in public, and then the fear of fear itself was a big one I kept on seeing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So specific things like spiders, elevators,
The dark.
That's gonna be on here. It's evolutionary. Yeah.
Storms is a pretty common one as well.
I love storms.
Some people are afraid of water. Hydrophobia is another one. So, and then of course there's the blood injection procedure phobia as well, which is very common.
What's the one where people are like scared of holes?
Trypophobia.
Yeah.
No, is it trypophobia?
It starts with a T. I do know that. But like I have a friend who's scared of that, and I'm like, it's just a hole.
I don't think people are so much. They say they're scared of it, but I think it just makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Of the bunch of little tiny holes together.
Yeah.
Like a bee, like a wasp nest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then the one I thought was interesting and I kept on seeing was the fear of fear itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of like, what does that mean? But then I understand it because you have anxiety about anxiety. Like you have anxiety about encountering things that you don't want to encounter, basically.
Right.
That's what I got from it.
Or maybe like the fear of feeling that feeling, because I hate feeling anxious. It makes me feel very scared, and very uncomfortable, and like sometimes I like get like blurry vision, and so I'm just like disoriented. So it's like I don't like that at all. So like I can understand that because it can make you feel disoriented and not like safe at all. So, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Something that's pretty common in like phobic disorder, for example. So, or panic disorder. So like people who have panic attacks start to like worry about the things that might make them have a panic attack. And then they start to get, afraid of like putting themselves into a situation where they might have that experience. And so they get the anticipatory anxiety and then also might like change their behavior. So for example, sometimes people who have what we call agoraphobia, meaning you're staying in, you're not going out, you're avoiding those public spaces or those social interactions. Like there's a few reasons you might do that. One of them might be an actual agoraphobia, meaning you're afraid of public spaces, you're afraid of crowds, you're afraid of being, outside. But more commonly, you're behaving that way because, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where maybe you have a panic attack in front of other people. And so you end up staying inside.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about our phobias? Or if we have any?
See, I don't. So does a phobia? I guess y'all could answer that for me. Does a phobia have to be like diagnosed, or is this?
It doesn't have to be diagnosed.
Is this like is this sometimes something that's a little bit more self-diagnosable because it's
one of those things. Like to officially have a phobia, yes, right?
Yeah.
It does have to be diagnosed, but we do think that the prevalence rates are higher than they appear to be, right? So people, if we're looking at like diagnosed phobias, the prevalence is somewhere between about 5 and 10% of the population. Depends a little bit on like what country you're in and what set of diagnostic criteria you're using. But generally speaking, 5 to 10, pretty safe range for diagnosed phobias. But the thought is it is a little bit higher probably than that.
Probably.
And the reason is like some people, they don't want to like go in for treatment of a phobia, or it's something that, yes, technically it would meet the diagnostic criteria for a phobia, but they don't encounter it enough to really be an issue for them, and so they just don't feel like they need to get treatment for it. So rates are probably a little bit higher. So for example, like an interesting little stat about phobias is that women are about twice as likely to have a phobia as men. But that is a diagnosed phobia, right?
Yeah.
And so we do have that issue where it's like, are men going to go in and get treatment or get help for a phobia? And the answer is, well, as with most things medical or with psychological treatments, males are less likely to actually like go in and get help when they need it.
right.
So I guess the better question would be, do we have any like fears?
Fears.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first? You can go first.
So I had a big phobia whenever I was younger of elevators. I refused, and if they didn't have stairs or an escalator, I just was not going upstairs. And I've gotten way more used to elevators here because I do not want to walk all those stairs. I'm just gonna have to get over it. But recently, never used the elevator in this building. I used it and got stuck. I had to climb my way out, and I was
seriously?
like, when
did that happen?
Not last semester, the semester before. I was getting a package, and I was like, I'm just gonna take the elevator.
For funsies.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was in there, and it just stopped, and it was like
Great.
half room, half elevator, and I was like, I'm not gonna have to climb out of here. And I texted Dustin, and I was like, I'm probably gonna be a little bit late to class.
Yeah.
And I just like couldn't talk for a little bit because I was like, that did not just happen to me.
Did you get help crawling out of it, or did you just like?
It was enough where I wasn't afraid it was gonna cut me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
would
what I
be
was
my
about to
fear.
say. I'm like, because I've seen those like emergency response, like fake TV shows, obviously,
Yeah.
where like, no,
Yeah.
nope. It's like Final Destination.
And I feel like that's linked to another fear I have, which is nothing being below and just falling. If that makes sense. So I'd rather get cut in half than the elevator drop. And I've had this fear since I was a little like kid.
Right.
Yeah. Roller skating rinks, I couldn't go in the middle because I was afraid it was just gonna drop.
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes roads afraid it's
Where they
gonna
have
drop.
sinkholes, yeah.
I'm afraid it's just gonna drop and there's gonna be nothing there. I'm not sure what causes that, but there's a lot of different. If it's like a huge room and there's nothing in the middle, I'm not gonna step in the middle because I'm afraid it's just gonna fall beneath me.
Okay.
Yeah, and no one else. I never hear anyone else talking about it. When I tell someone else, they're like, "That's not normal," and I'm like, "But think about it. Like falling, that's scary."
Well, because like I've heard from skydivers, like falling isn't scary until you look at the ground because you don't feel the falling. Like if you're looking straight up, it's like, oh, I'm just kind of chilling, and there's like a lot of wind going on right now. But the second you flip over, it's like, oh, the ground is coming closer. Okay, like maybe I should, be a little frightened right now. I think it's just like the perceived like idea of knowing that you're falling is the freaky idea to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what that's about.
Well, because I've had like 3 fears in my life. I had a fear of space. I was terrified of accidentally like the world exploding and me getting flung into space, which you can't breathe in space. So like, I don't know why I'd be floating through space. But weirdly enough, Star Wars helped with that. Because I was like, oh, okay, people live in space all the time. Like, it's fine.
Nothing bad ever happens in Star
Nothing
Wars.
bad ever happens in Star Wars to nice people, so I'm fine. And I kind of got over that one really quickly after watching Star Wars. I hate the dark. Like, not the dark itself, but what is lingering in the dark. Like, one of my biggest fears is home invasion. And so, like, I'm scared. Like, in my dorm, I have a lamp near my bed so that I can turn it on and I can light up the underneath of my bed because I'm scared someone's going to be underneath there. That's where my storage boxes are because there's no way someone can hide underneath there without my storage boxes being moved around. And one of the boxes would have to be out in the middle of my living area. So I would know somebody's under my bed. I know. That freaks me out. I know it's like the monster under the bed thing. I don't like that idea. And I hate my closet doors closed. I don't like that. Like it'll act like it freaks me out. And I can't sleep with the light off. I have to have some sort of light on.
Wow.
Mine
Mine has to be completely dark.
Completely light needs to be a light on. The closet, there has to be at least one closet door open. So if something like I can hear something, I can hear it. But the closet doors, I've had a hard time this year with McRae because the closet doors are right next to my only exit besides my window. And I don't like that at all. But I've kind of chilled out because there's only one key to the room and my suite mate is really good about locking her door and like not letting weird people in. And so like it's been fine, but I also like the idea of like living in a cabin in the woods where no one can help you if there's a home invasion. I hate home invasion. I think that's what it is. Home invasion. I hate people in my space that should not be there. That I don't know if that's a fear or a phobia. It doesn't like cripple me and I'm like sitting on the floor just like
If
I feel like
it's not
that's
causing
rational.
impairment, then
right.
it should
It's
be
not causing
fine.
impairment. It's just like I don't like the idea of someone in my home.
If you're lying awake at night and like worrying about it and not sleeping,
Okay, at the beginning
little
of this
bit-
semester, it
Okay,
was
so
rough.
sometimes.
Not this semester, but the beginning of this year, it was like,
do
somebody could totally get in my closet. Somebody could totally be under my bed. And so like my friend's suggestion was just put boxes underneath there. And I was like, that's a good idea because I hate my storage boxes underneath my desk. And so like that helped. But like I'm not like laying awake at night every night doing that. It's like only if I think about it, or like if I play a video game that has home invasion in it, which I did a few weeks ago, and that was a really bad idea. And also it was the back rooms I played, and there was like somebody in. Oh, I didn't like that. But yeah, I don't like. I don't know if it's the dark or if it's like
The dark, probably.
I think it's the dark because what is linger? If I can't see it, I don't know it's there, and I don't know if it's there or not there. And so like. I think it's just the not being able to perceive it is what freaks me out the most.
You and John Watson. John Watson was also terrified of the dark, always slept with a light on.
Oh.
And that was his inspiration for the little Albert study. Like,
Oh, awesome.
Let me scare another child.
exactly. Let's see if we can make a kid afraid and see what happens. Because he blamed his nanny and his mother for telling him frightening stories about like what happened in the dark to make him behave. So he thought that's why he was afraid of the dark. But he's like, well, you don't know until I make a child afraid, and then I'll know that you can indeed train fear. So thus the little Albert study.
Well, and my dad can definitely attest to my fear because I think I was like 9, 10 maybe. Dad, correct me if I'm wrong. I read the Maze Runner books. And in the Maze Runner, there's these things called crawlers, creakers, whatever. They're giant like bug creatures that hide in the maze in the dark crevices and will come out and chase you. And so every night, like for maybe a solid few months, I don't know, Dad, you probably remember this more than me, I would get terrified and wake up screaming because I thought something like dark in the corner of my room was moving, and I thought it was something coming out of the wall to get me and take me into the maze. It was like, I was so scared of that. And it was just like any kind of like small thing would like trigger that. And now I'm older, I'm just like, oh, I could totally take somebody. Like if someone wants to come in my space, like I'm going to put up a fight. But like 9-year-old, no. 9-year-old Hannah would just curl up right here and like be defenseless. What's your fear?
My answer is boring. I don't have a particularly intense fear of anything.
Really?
Yeah, unfortunately, I did rack my mind to think if I could come up with an interesting story, but unfortunately not.
Do you have like any like siblings or cousins that maybe had something? You don't have to say their names, obviously.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I'd say like the closest thing I have is probably like I don't like wasps.
Okay.
So it's fairly close, but again, it doesn't rise to the threshold of being like a phobia because it doesn't cause avoidance or any impairment or anything like that. But yeah, if there's a wasp in my space, I'm not in that space.
Are you
anymore.
allergic?
I'm not, right? That would make more sense.
Right.
Then it would be proportionate with the danger, but it isn't. I really don't like them.
Right.
So especially like the brown wasps, I think is what they're called.
Dirt daubers?
Guinea
Maybe.
wasps?
Dirt daubers
They're
are
the
nice.
ones that are like this big and they're kind of red.
No,
red
dirt
brown.
are blue.
Yeah, they're blue.
With like the really long legs of those ones. Those I don't like.
Like the huge wasps?
Yeah, like the big
They hurt
brown
when they
wasps.
sting.
The African oh no, I know it because they're huge. Yeah, that's actually kind of valid.
See, where I live, we call those guinea wasps.
Guinea wasps? Those are not guineas. Those are huge.
Well, guineas are scary. That's something else. Guineas are so scary.
The bird? Mm-hmm. Like the tiny bird?
Well, yeah, they're tiny, but they're scary.
That like run in packs? The pack birds? Is that the
Why
right
are they
word?
scary?
Might be the pack bird. My grandparents had them growing up, and they would dive bomb you.
Yes, yes, they dive bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'd just be walking, and they'd come out like flying over us, coming down at us.
Yeah, they do that. They'll get
That
on
made
top
me
of
think
buildings.
about another fear. Not necessarily now, but like growing up, I grew up in a very Southern, very Christian household. So the end of the world was one of my biggest fears. I would stay awake at night crying because I was so scared that hell was gonna break open and come and get me. Yeah.
Like the second coming of Jesus?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church and household. So not necessarily my parents, more so my grandparents instilled the fear in me that you better, be baptized and do good or,
when
the
Jesus
world's
comes
gonna
again,
end.
yeah.
So I had constant nightmares about that. And you would think it wouldn't really be a nightmare if it's like something good, but it was fear-mongering.
Yeah.
Like they
It's like
wanted
the whole rapture thing. Is that the
Oh, that's the word of
Gotcha.
it. The rapture, yeah.
the rapture and like Revelations.
What's it? So like how much, wow. Okay. How many phobias and like instilled fears do you think are like the consequence of fear mongering?
Oh, so many.
Like how many of that, like, I guess a better question is like how many of our fears are like induced because of like our parents or like older influences in our life when we were younger?
That's our next topic, actually.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Segue.
Yeah. Yeah. So I said, why do we have phobias? And the first thing was evolutionary.
So a lot of our phobias are things that do connect to fears that make sense in a world that's a lot more dangerous, right? So kind of like we're hyper vigilant about certain things. And so if you think about like insects, for example, right? There's not really like a benefit of messing around with spiders or wasps or things like that. There's nothing good that comes from it, but potentially there is something bad, and so we're frightened of them. Small animals are often vectors for disease. So like if you've got a fear of like mice or rats or things like that, that seems to be the connection there. Or like heights, for example, like what is the benefit of us being up on a cliff or up on a mountain? And again, so it seems to like logically make a lot of sense that we would be afraid of heights. And then again, you can kind of go through illness, anxieties, that tracks, right? Animals with predatory features, even like, dogs, for example, right? Also makes sense. And so a lot of our fears kind of connect to those like, evolutionary fears, things that would have been good for us to avoid. And maybe, now in the modern world where we don't really have to worry about those sorts of things, maybe the benefits of having that like hyper-tuned stress response, it's no longer a particularly good thing, but it kept our ancestors alive, right? And so that's maybe where some of those come from, but also some of them are learned, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if you see a parent, acting with fear because of something, maybe they're terrified of mice or they're terrified of illness, right? Kids do pick up on that. And then we'll often see what we call family clustering, which is where like, parents have a phobia, and then siblings have a phobia, and then other family members also have phobias as well. And so you can kind of just see it like running through a family, which is pretty common for psychiatric disorders, but definitely happens with phobias as well. So some of them are definitely learned.
Yeah, whenever you were talking about the fear of the dark, it was just like lighting in my brain, evolutionary, because that's one of the main ones that like we adapted and learned was fear of the dark.
Yeah.
Because like
we can't see anything in there.
Yeah, our ancestors, there's like cave paintings, so that shows proof that people lived in caves. I actually said caveman brain on here. Not sure that's offensive to cavemen out there. But,
Neanderthal, yeah.
But like they were afraid of caves. I mean, they were afraid of the dark because if you're in the dark, bad stuff can happen to you. Like you don't know what's in the dark, and that's where the fear of the dark comes from, is that you don't know what's in there.
Wait, so I have like a really interesting question. I did my 23andMe DNA test, and I got it back, and I have 86% Neanderthal DNA.
Oh,
which is caveman DNA. Not like stupid. It's just ancient DNA. Don't laugh, Cheyenne. I am intelligent.
If Dustin were here, he'd be mad you said stupid.
Yes. But would there be a connection with how much DNA somebody has sharing with Neanderthal DNA and evolutionary or like evolved phobias?
That's a Dr. Miller question.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that one though.
Wouldn't that be interesting though?
No, I'm not sure.
What if we just
86% seems like a very high percentage.
Oh,
too.
thank you. It was like 80 something.
Are you sure this was like a good DNA test?
Probably not. It's 23andMe. Gotcha. But like, it's still interesting that at least was like dinged. Because it also did talk about like people with higher on 23andMe, which, how reliable. Actually, I don't want to get like a scandal with 23andMe with our tiny little
there
podcast.
Has been recent stuff coming out about 23andMe being a phony.
Yes. Yeah, there has been stuff. And I want to get like my full like DNA. Like I want to look at all my like my genes and all that. I think it'd be so cool. But
they did also have a data breach pretty recently.
I know. I got that email. But nonetheless, they did have a section where it talked about my Neanderthal DNA. And it said that I was more likely to have a fear of heights than other people. And so I kind of like, y'all were talking about that. And I was kind of thinking about that. It's like, is there a higher chance of having this like fear of spiders, fear of the dark, fear of heights because of the Neanderthal DNA? Or is there really no connection? Or is there like,
I think it's instilled in all of us to be
Right.
afraid. Like whenever you're a little kid, you're afraid of loud noises. You're afraid of being away from your parents. You have stranger anxiety. I think like that's a reflex, right?
Very similar to it. Yeah, it does seem to be like, especially like stranger anxiety does seem to be something that is just normative, right? That's just a part of development. It should decline after like that first year. That should tune down a little bit. But yeah, it instinctually people 6-month-olds to like 1 year at least have a very high level of stranger anxiety. And if you think about like what would be sort of the evolutionary mechanism behind that? Well, if you think about like you've got one infant who's like cool strangers and one infant who's like, nope, I'm going to stay near, my parents. The infant who stays near their parents is probably more likely to survive, more likely to make it to adulthood, more likely to reproduce than the infant who's like, oh, cool, who's that rando, and crawls off. Right?
And gets taken. Yes.
Gets taken, right? That's probably not an ideal situation.
Yeah, and the next thing was classical conditioning, and I actually had little Albert on here.
No.
Yeah, because I feel like that's one of the main examples. So if you don't know about little Albert, I'll explain a little bit and then let the actual psychology person do it. So little Albert was a study with, I've already forgot his name. We just said it.
John Watson.
John Watson. And he basically conditioned a child to be afraid of dogs by playing loud noises and scaring him. And it was not ethical at all. We did not agree with it. But it did teach us a lot about classical conditioning.
Yes, this was one of the earliest studies that showed that a fear could be conditioned. And of course, the inspiration was, John Watson's own childhood fears of the dark that then persisted into his adulthood. And certainly wasn't an ethical study. There were issues with things like informed consent. So, notoriously what Watson did is he just went to the daycare of Johns Hopkins University and was like, here's a kid. I'm going to take that kid and we're going to scare him. And so what he did too, and you're right that it did generalize to dogs as well, but they started off with a rat. Right. And so what they did is they took metal bars and they clanged them behind little Albert's head every time they showed him a small animal. And then it generalized to dogs. It generalized to like a stuffed toy. There's a video you can watch of this procedure too. And one of the things it generalized to is also like, John Watson in like a frightening mask, like a rabbit mask.
Oh, that's so sad.
That's an interesting image to pull up if you can. But ultimately, like his being little Albert's mother was a custodial worker at Johns Hopkins and figured out eventually that her kid was missing from the daycare and what was happening. And then she quit her job, took Albert and just left, which does seem like the appropriate response.
Right.
But that was one of the first studies of like, can we condition a fear? And the answer was definitely, we sure can. Right? if you want to, you definitely can.
Yeah, but why would you? Why would you need to do that?
Wasn't little Albert a very sick? No, he wasn't a sick kid. He didn't have a
multiple
disability.
stories, I think, because I've heard.
I've heard that he lived a long life. I've heard that he died young.
Yes.
I've heard
there's a lot of apocrypha about like what happens to little Albert. The thing is that he didn't keep very good records.
Right.
so like we have the video record. We know he did the study, but then after that, like you can find some articles that are like, I think we found him and I think he's over here and he lived to like 80 years old and was fine. And then there's some articles that are like, I think we found him and he died of some childhood illness, 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure what happened to him. Maybe there's a good article out there somewhere that tracks him down, but there's definitely a lot of like,
right
ideas.
Well, and the most unethical part about this, which we learned about in your class, is that he didn't uncondition it. He just left the kid with the fear.
Right. So like if you do a bad thing to somebody, you should fix it. And he did not do that.
Yeah. Yeah, my boyfriend was on Instagram Reels the other day and he was like, I saw this psychology thing and was talking about, I thought you would think it's really interesting. I don't think you know about it. There was this kid that was conditioned to be afraid of dogs with loud noises. I said, little Albert? He was like, okay, never mind. And I was like, that's like one of the main things we talked about in Intro to Psych, every single psychology
cognitive
class I've had.
Intro to research methods.
Yes, because it's very valid, very
important.
interesting to learn.
It's a good example for a lot of sections of psychology about what not to do.
So it's definitely that. Yeah.
Yeah. Not like what to do, what not to do.
Yes. And so now we're going to move on to thanks for the anxiety, James, Mom. And it's basically just how fears and phobias can be observational. We kind of touched on this a little bit, but I kind of want to talk a little bit more about it and how our own personal experiences, maybe if our parents are afraid of anything.
So it's funny you mentioned like wasps and bees. My dad is like allergic to wasps and bees, like really bad. And so I'm not. We found that out by accident when I got stung by accident. And so I'm not. It hurts a lot though. But whenever I see one, I've gotten better about it. I don't like tweak out and like do like a backflip, run away, like crazy stuff like that. But like I do kind of know it. I can feel my heart rate get up, but I'm just like, I'm going to ignore you because if I leave you alone, you should leave me alone. And if you come after me, I will kill you. So, you know, there's that. I will give you the opportunity to not kill me. Well, it won't kill me, but that. And then like my mom is scared of heights. Like, you know, those giant overpasses that you can drive on. I love those. It's like a roller coaster. I hate roller coasters though.
I love roller coasters, but I'm afraid of heights and I'm afraid of open places, but I love roller coasters.
See, I hate roller coasters, but I love driving those overpasses. I don't know. I think it's the coolest thing ever. It's like my car's kind of flying. That's so cool. But like my mom's scared of that. And for a little bit, I was like, oh my gosh, what if we did fall off this overpass? Like into the lake, like beneath us. That'd be crazy. But like after a while, I'm just like, it's whatever. But like, I mean, none of my fears were really, from what I can remember, like learned from my parents. My parents aren't scared of the dark. My dad will like run into the dark to go take care of like an animal in the back pasture or something. My mom just won't do that because it's my dad that does that. And my brother, my grandparents, or anybody isn't like scared of the dark or anything. I don't know why I'm scared of the dark that much, but or intruders. Maybe my fear of like intruders is the fact that I do live in the county and I have some crazy neighbors who probably won't ever watch this, so I'm okay with talking about it, who like have been on our property before, like more than once, which is once too many. And so, like, maybe that's where I got that fear of, like, I don't like people in my space. But I also do play a lot of horror video games and, like, you know.
Sorry, I'm taking notes. I'm not just texting.
No, you're good. You're good. I noticed you were taking notes. So I was like, oh. But, like, maybe that. But I don't think anything from my parents, per se. Because my parents are pretty, like, they don't show fear a lot, which I think was really helpful with me not developing some serious phobias. And they were really, like, reassuring about the maze runner stuff that happened where I was scared of the things coming out of the walls and getting me. My dad still makes fun of me about it, but it is funny. Like, that's the thing, is it was really funny that I did that. But they helped me with it, and it wasn't like, oh yeah, there are things in the wall coming to get you, Hannah. It's like, no, there aren't. We'll sit with you until you go to sleep. Chill out. And so it wasn't, I don't know. I don't think I didn't have anything in front of me to be scared of. Except overpasses and roller coasters. Sorry, Mom, love you.
Do you have any?
I mean, I'll talk a little bit about just the idea behind it, right? So there's something called passive gene by environment interaction that comes up a lot when it comes to like inheriting a parental fear. And so part of it is that there does appear to be a genetic connection for phobias. Particularly, some phobias seem to be like more genetically inheritable. So like the injection blood phobia, for example, is more heritable than a lot of other phobias. So if you've got a parent who has that, you're more likely to also share that phobia than just the average person would be. But then some of it is like a combination of that genetic predisposition and then also like the environment that you're being raised in. And those things tend to interact together to enhance your vulnerability as well. So like you can imagine a situation where maybe like a parent has that blood or injection phobia, and then that means that, you know, you do inherit the risk for that particular, you know, predisposition, but then also in the environment, in the home, you know, if somebody gets injured, you're likely to see sort of an overreaction, or, you know, because people with that specific phobia do also have the vasovagal response where they tend to pass out. Maybe you see like you get hurt and your parent freaks out about you getting injured and then passes out, and that enhances that fear experience. And so you basically got like a double whammy. You've got the genetics and you also have the environmental contribution, and combined, that's really going to increase your chance of inheriting that particular phobia.
Sorry, my sunburn's like itching. Yeah, like both. My mom is very terrified of clowns. I'm like, how many clowns do you encounter on a daily basis? But she's
Hopefully not many.
hopefully not many. She's very afraid of clowns. I'm not sure where that came from. I'd have to assume you know, the first It came out around the time she was a kid. So I'm assuming that's where it stemmed from.
When was she born, before or after when the John Wayne Gacy cases came out? Because I know a lot of people have thought that maybe some of those fears from children were
She's a girl.
Oh, that's true. You're right. But still, that's kind of scary.
It is scary. When did that
I
happen?
thought 90s, but now I'm fearing that it might be like way earlier, and I don't think your mom is like that.
She was born in 76.
Our parents are the same age. I didn't know that. I don't know. Do you know? You're
Top of my head, I don't. I want to guess 70s or 80s, but
70s or 80s times. But I know, like, I've read, there was actually not read. It was a documentary, and it was about the John Wayne Gacy tapes. And there was like this small, like 30-minute section where a psychologist was like, there's been theories about like kids are scared of clowns because of this guy, and like also It, and also like kind of the
Definitely It.
and like kind of because that was also around the same time, and so kind of this like fear. Is it fear? It's not really fear mongering because it's not meant to cause. I mean, maybe it
Clowns
was.
are fear mongering, I believe.
Okay, yeah, clowns are, and I think John Wayne Gacy definitely was that.
Yeah.
That did cause. So maybe it was just a case of fear mongering, kind of like how. I don't know. Now I just had a brain fart, but yeah, let's. I'm just saying maybe that is something in it because John Wayne Gacy freaks me out too. So.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe Pennywise is like loosely based off of John Wayne Gacy.
I'm pretty
I'd have to
sure.
assume. And so you see something and you're like, I'm gonna make my own part of this and I'm gonna profit off of it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna take something that's already kind of scaring people and I'm gonna make it 10 times scarier and market it towards young children. And I think that probably caused fear of clowns.
Yeah, because I think It, when it first came out, was like what, PG?
Yeah.
PG-13, like something
And like
very
if you
young.
watch it, there's not really
No,
any
it's not
gore.
scary.
Like watching it now, like at my age I am now, there's not really any gore, and not in the new movies.
The new one freaks me
Not
out.
the new ones. The older
the old
ones.
one was just made for TV, so like it's possible kids just encountered it accidentally, right? So I don't think it got a theatrical release initially. It was just just there, so you could turn on the TV and watch it and be like, oh look,
Oh, look, clown.
costumed character, that's fun, and then it gets not fun very quickly.
Yes. Yeah, and the new movies is just... We watched that whenever I was a freshman for psychology horror, and I actually had to step out of the room whenever he was, spoiler, eating the little boy.
Yeah.
He eats his arm off because, like, that part, obviously I don't like blood. I don't like blood.
Also a little kid.
Yeah, but it's the fact that it's a child and he's in there screaming. I had to walk out of the room because I've seen it before. So I was like, I'm going to walk out because I don't want to have a reaction to this.
Well, and imagine being a little kid seeing that. Like, that's literally their age range. And why is this clown eating this kid that could be my classmate's arm?
Yeah.
That's terrifying. Like, that's what clowns do, Mom. And it's like, no, that's not what clowns do. And it's like, well, that's what the TV said. So,
Saw it on TV, it must be true.
see on
Yeah.
TV must be true. But that's like little kids, like, they can't. I mean, they can determine like some things are like true or not, real or not, right or wrong. But like when you see it on TV and you're like, how old is Georgie? 5, 6?
A little boy.
Yeah, little boy.
Young.
Like when you're around that age range and you see something on the TV, like if Mickey Mouse tells you go color this coloring sheet, aye, Mickey Mouse, I'm gonna go color this coloring sheet. Like if they see it on TV and are influenced by other things on the television, why wouldn't they be influenced by that as well?
Yeah. One of my friends growing up caught Jaws on TV. He was like 5 or 6 years old,
Yeah.
and then for the longest time, years, wouldn't even get into the pool. He would just sit on the outside of the pool.
Really?
Yeah. You know, honestly, when I was younger, I was afraid to get in the pool because I was scared there was going to be a shark in there. And I was afraid to get in the bathtub because I was afraid a shark was going to be in there. But that's like a little kid thing, I think. But yeah, my mom was terrified of clowns growing up, and I'm sure Pennywise has something to do with it. Those new movies are terrifying.
The second one I thought was funny. I feel so bad for saying that, but like the first one was terrifying.
First one was very scary.
Scared me. Second one, I was like, when he turned into that giant like spider crab
I
thingy,
feel like
I
the
was
second one
like,
was scarier.
really?
Whenever he lured that little girl underneath the bleachers. And
Oh yeah,
that
was
triggered
freaky.
something in me, and I had to turn the TV off.
Turn this TV on.
But I like
Turn
horror
this TV
movies, but that was a little bit too jump scary for me.
on. Okay.
That actually made me think about something we talked about in Dr. Miller's class, is how the original Pennywise was terrifying at the time, but you watch it now and it's not that scary.
Is that
but,
desensitization?
Kinda, but it's kind of like us adapting to like, okay, so that was scary at the time, and now you watch it and it's like, that's not really that scary. But then you watch the new Pennywise, you're like, oh, that's terrifying.
Right.
But 50 more years, people will probably new
gosh.
Pennywise movie will be out, and they'll watch the one that's now, and they're like, oh, that's not that scary.
I don't even want to know what's going to come out in 50 years.
I do think it's desensitization because of yeah.
There's definitely been a shift in like the sorts of things that are shown in horror movies. Because if you look at like, news reports back from when the first Exorcist movie came out, people they're the scariest movie ever. People like, there's reports of people fainting in the theater, of leaving in the middle, of throwing up. And when you watch, you're like, I don't know, it's kind of tame, right?
Yeah.
Like, The Exorcist it's not that scary.
Right.
It's a good movie. Don't get me wrong,
yeah.
but it's not that frightening. But at the time it was. Same thing with like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't remember whether, was that your year where we watched
Texas.
the first one, the 70s
We
one?
watched Evil Dead.
Evil Dead, okay. Yeah, but like the first Texas Chainsaw, it has this reputation of being like this extremely gory, hyper violent movie. And, I'll typically let people like vote on which film they want to watch. And that one came up. I was like, just so you know, I mean, it's not as gory or as scary as its reputation. And like, sure enough, like basically nothing happens for the first 2/3 of the movie. And the rest of it is like, it's by today's standards, not gory at all.
Yeah, like the original Nosferatu. That's something like you showed in class
Yeah.
was the original clip for Nosferatu, and the people in the
stairwell
class
and everything.
Yeah, the
Yep.
people in the class giggled at it.
Yeah.
But like back then, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Oh, that new movie is great.
It is.
I haven't
it's
seen
very
it yet.
good.
Is it good?
It's very
I watched
good,
it
yeah.
on TikTok.
Well, I think, like, I don't know if this is me just being super biased to one horror film. The first horror film I ever watched was The Blair Witch Project. Scared me.
Yeah, but
And
it
I
never
watched the
shows
original
anything.
one. Exactly. I think that is one movie that will be scary forever for me, and for a lot of people, because it's found footage. I think it makes it too real. I think because like some horror films, seriously, a demon clown turning into a giant like crab snake thing. I don't remember what it turns into, like spider
spider.
thing.
All sorts of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that is like things of fantasy, and it's easier to not be less afraid of fantasy, but to be able to recognize that it's fantasy and not. The Blair Witch Project, I don't know.
Well, the marketing was really interesting for that as well, because like initially, so first of all, it was mainly the actors in that film were amateurs, so they were not professional actors. So people didn't recognize them as actors, and they also marketed it as if it was like an actual VHS tape that was found by people who were investigating this crime.
Yes.
So fascinating. I mean, and again, you could see through it, but if you were only sort of like a little bit aware of the film, you might actually think like, oh, maybe this is an actual like tape that was found. And so all of that kind of played into the lore. And at the time, again, it was like something that people were terrified of.
Yeah. I know, like, what's it called? I've read like or watched like people go and do movie reviews of it who are like a little bit older and who were like teenagers when that movie came out, and they were like, I couldn't hike whenever that movie came out. Like, I could not hike for a few years.
It was a whole cultural phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very cool.
Well, and like, I think it's really interesting about the desensitization because, like, my grandparents, I guess, what would be like a huge horror film? Oh, what's it? And
They're in
what would have been a movie that came out in like
the
the
greatest
60s?
generation, right?
Depends how old are they?
I was looking. They're not in the baby boomers. They're
Gotcha.
the one before. I think that's the GI. Greatest
There's also
generation.
the silent generation, so that's like
Yeah.
if
My
they
grandfather is, Paco, 74, I think.
Mine are about to be 80.
that would probably be silent generation, which are the
Silent?
people who were like born right during they weren't old enough to serve in the Second World War, but they were born during the
Yes.
Second World
Okay.
War.
Yes. My
Yeah, I don't know
grandparents
the
were born
exact-
like right at the tail end of it, actually.
Yeah, I don't know the exact years.
It's a pretty small generation too.
What horror movies would be coming out around
Nosferatu.
the 60s? Nosferatu?
The GI and silent was like 20s, 30s, so that's like Nosferatu time.
yeah.
30s, 40s.
Wasn't-
We talked about this in class.
There's
I'm
one.
trying to
Is
think.
Snakes on a Plane? Is that considered a horror film?
It was to me when
That's
I was
like
younger.
90s.
Yeah. Oh, that's 90s?
Yeah, I
They
think
count in
so.
the 90s? Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
That one's pretty recent.
Oh.
Yeah, that was an interesting, like, if we were thinking about, like, 60s and 70s, like, what was coming out then, the answer is, in the 60s, like, Psycho would have been, so the Alfred Hitchcock film, and then 70s, all sorts of stuff, because that's about the era where the Hays Code was lifted, so, the Hays Code really limited horror films for a long time. That was basically Hollywood's self-policing to keep themselves from being censored by the government. They're like, we're not going to show a whole list of stuff.
things.
Some things problematic. Where you're like, I don't know why you wouldn't show that. And then there are other things that it's like, we aren't going to show these types of violence and things like that. And so that's why like you'll often see older films like will cut away from violent things, or they just won't show depictions of violence. Right. And that was all due to so it's kind of like the comic book authority code as well around the same time that eventually got lifted around the 80s.
Right.
It's the same kind of deal where they didn't want to be censored, and so therefore they did some self-censorship. Around the 1970s, that disappeared. It was no longer a thing. And so you just see this explosion of horror movies that kind of push the limits of what was acceptable before. And that's kind of where you see things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre coming into play, and, slasher films start to emerge.
Yeah.
And a bunch of exploitation films start to appear and things like that.
Yeah. I remember talking about that, the Hays Code and the different generations and like what they were, the horror movies. I know during the 70s, like serial killers were, I mean, they've always been a thing, but they were like becoming more talked about, probably is the best word for that.
Yeah.
So like that's like you just take whatever people are afraid of, and after the Vietnam War, World War II, World War I was a long time ago, but World War II, you're afraid of, and then what's that? The Cold War. You're afraid of a nuclear war, so you take that and you profit off of it. You take what you think people are afraid of, like you're afraid of a nuclear war. Okay, so you're afraid of aliens because you're afraid of disformities. The space races around that time. That's why I said aliens.
Yeah.
You take what people are afraid of at the time, and you exploit that, and you make money off of it. And they do a good job at making money off of it. I think in a couple years we're going to see a COVID movie come out.
Probably more infection movies. Yeah, because after that I wholeheartedly agree with that, because after the Ebola virus situation happened, infection, quarantine, a bunch of low budget, really bad horror films. Sorry to the people who made those movies, but like they were pretty bad. But like a lot of those films came out about infections, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm still watching The Walking Dead. I just got to season 7, episode 1. So if you've ever seen it, there was like the season 6, or maybe it was season 5, I can't remember, happened right after the Ebola virus, and then they introduced the virus that went across the camp. And like it was this huge virus that was causing people to get sick, dying, turning into zombies. That's basically all it was. But then there was like a lot of shows around that time, because like Grey's Anatomy then had their infection season, and Criminal Minds had an infection season where there was like, it was very weird, where there were a lot of like, because it was a lot more like criminal stuff, so there were like sexually transmitted diseases, stuff like that, but still diseases that were being passed around. And like that happened right after the Ebola virus situation had happened.
Yeah, so you basically just take what people are afraid of during the time, and you just exploit that, and you make money off of it, and you will be successful at making money off of it.
And like, but like, brain fart, if that instills like lifelong phobias in people, like, I mean, I don't know. You could say it's unethical and you could like fight it, but how much are you going to get them to not do that anymore? Or like instill that in young people? And I think that also comes into a factor about the argument about like how much media is too much media for children, and like what is good to show kids, what is not good, how do we teach our children what's not good, what's the right age, like, that whole argument about like, is media good media right now for children?
Yeah.
Don't
know the answer to that. I've seen a lot of videos on social media, so it's probably not very trustworthy. But it's like, my kid was on YouTube watching this, and this popped up, and it's like a cartoon character doing the most disgusting things, and the kid just sitting there watching it. They're like, I had no idea my child was sitting here watching this.
Well, there's a new web series going on right now where it's a zombie apocalypse themed Bluey animation, and it's on YouTube Kids, and it's like horribly disfigured Bluey characters, like just it's I saw it and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool, I guess, like if that's what you're into. And then I found out it was on YouTube Kids.
Yeah, it's an issue. I mean, it's ultimately YouTube Kids. The problem with it is it's user created content that we're then hoping we're going to catch if anything inappropriate goes onto it, and they do usually catch and remove stuff that is inappropriate, but somebody's kid has to be exposed to it before
it can be,
And, the answer to that, if you're a parent, is, well, maybe just don't trust the algorithm with like what your kid is watching. Maybe pick videos for them. You can put them in a playlist. You can set that aside if you want to show YouTube videos to your kid or something else, right? You can always do like, you could actually just show them Bluey instead of like putting them on YouTube to find stuff instead.
Yeah. Disney
'Cause I
Plus
feel
is
like-
good about not showing your kids horrible, awful graphic things.
It's a lot more
Yeah.
curated, and that's probably what you need. Again, if you have to step away and have your kid watching something, then probably something that's curated rather
Right.
than just
Yeah.
user generated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had unlimited internet access at a very young age. So
Me too.
I know the dark sides of YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, because there was a lot of that in whenever the internet was starting to pick up. Because I watched My Little Pony when I was younger. Lots of people would have very inappropriate My Little
Oh.
Pony animations.
Oh my god, I just thought of this. It was like sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you.
go ahead.
But I was, I had unlimited YouTube access as a kid, and there was like this My Little Pony X infection, and I've been seeing it come on my TikTok again. Yes, it was, and I watched it, and I was like terrified because there's these characters that I watched in this TV show, and they are like rabid and like scary.
Rabid
Why
ponies.
would you have
Yeah.
that on YouTube for a kid to watch?
I think, well, and it's just another conversation of like, it's unethical, but who's going to stop it? Like, everybody has the freedom to do what they please, and it's kind of your responsibility to watch your own kid, but at the same time, like,
I mean, I clicked on it, so that's on me.
I don't know. I think the genetic predisposition and the environment, but also the environment can be like the media, can be like what your parents are talking about, what's going on in the media. I think also like, I think that's one thing I did hear a lot when I was younger was like, oh, don't worry about that. That's adult things. Whenever I'd want to watch the news. And, when we were 7, it was 2012. So it was a new election year. That was the year where the war on terrorism was kind of like, because Osama bin Laden was killed and like all this stuff was going on in the world. And it was just like, oh, you don't need to worry about that. That's for adults to worry about. And like, that's adult things. So of course it makes you more interested. And of course, unlimited internet access, you find it. And so like,
Yeah.
I think also that, how do I say that, like kind of like image where it's like this is an adult thing can kind of also be a little bit of a fearful thing if it's something we don't understand as a kid. It's like, oh, this is an adult thing, this is something to be fearful of as an adult, because like now as an adult I'm very fearful of like other country like conflict, which I think that's pretty common across people because that's a pretty commonly fearful thing. But like when I was little, it was like, that's an adult thing, like you don't need to be worried about it. And now that I'm an adult, it's like, now I'm really worried about it.
Yeah.
Now it's like I'm that adult where I was told not to worry about it because it's adult scary things. And now I'm in the adult scary thing, and it made this predisposition, I don't know. It's like gave me this premonition.
I don't know what word you're looking for.
Premonition. I think that's the word I'm looking for. I'm trying to like bounce it off of you and maybe something comes out.
Right.
But like premonition of I should be fearful of this when I'm older. And now like, yeah, it's still something scary to be like something to be scared about. But like sometimes I'll find myself just like scrolling AP News for hours, like what's going on? How do I figure this out? And it's like not a phobia, but it's just like maybe that kind of like precursor was getting told it's like this big adult thing.
I think predisposed.
Predisposed might be the right word.
I think,
Pre something.
Yeah.
It's just I was previously exposed.
yeah. Something I notice a lot is that around that age, I started to become curious about adult things. Not that kind of adult things, but like you tell a child like, don't worry about that. Like that's an adult thing to worry about. Like around that age, you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna worry about that now, and I'm gonna look deeper into that now. Because I'm intrigued by it and I'm curious, and that's why you have like a lot of kids around that age that spew kind of hateful things sometimes, political things. Either because they saw their parents or heard their parents talking about it, or they saw it on the internet and they're like, oh, okay, well, I want to act like an adult. So, and there's these adults doing these things, so that's how I be an adult. There's a lot of kids in my hometown specifically that spew stuff about politics. I'm like, where did you hear this? I'm like, you are, in middle school. Why are you wearing merch? Merch for a political candidate.
Yeah. Well, and I also think a big part of children, and also just any adult, because any adult can be fearful of something, but fear does come from the unknown and the uneducation when it comes to other people. And so some people do have reactions and have conversations that they don't really, they probably won't believe later in their life when they become educated. And it's because the fear of not knowing and the fear of being uneducated causes hate. And I think I think it's a very kind way to think of hate in the world, but children don't understand things fully. A kid is not going to understand that there's a war. Like, a kid who wasn't raised in a war environment is not going to understand why a war is going on, why people don't like a certain group of people. And so they're not going to understand it, and it's going to make them fear it because they don't understand it. And it's something that's unknown, something they can't put their finger on. It's not this like simple concept where like, yes, this block is red. It's like, no, there's like this whole world of complex like situations that you don't understand. And so I think that's where it comes from, is also hearing from their parents, but also, and the people around them, and maybe even teachers, which heaven forbid not teachers, but like other people around them. And also this mixture of like, this isn't some surefire thing I can put my finger on. I'm scared of it. I'm going to react to it in a best way I can, which is a defensive mode and to protect myself.
Yeah. And that's something we're talking about a lot in human development, is around that age, you know, kids are curious and they're starting to develop more like, what is the word I'm looking for? The word of like thinking.
Cognition?
Critical thinking.
Oh, okay,
they're getting better critical thinking skills, and they're curious about the world outside them around that, you know, time period, and it continues.
And parents can help too by kind of like curating the stuff that their kids encounter. And like, maybe the best thing to do isn't just to, you know, tell them not to worry about it, don't think about it, because clearly that creates more curiosity
Right.
And maybe more fear. And so maybe the best option is to like, you know, give them a boiled down version that also kind of eases some fears. Like a simplified version is probably certainly better than a detailed version sometimes, depending on what you're talking about, but is also probably better than just, you know, no information.
Well, I hope they did not pick that up on the mic.
Well, because like it's also very difficult. Kids are difficult. Let me rephrase that. It's always scary because you never know what you're going to do that's going to influence a kid. That is a big fear of mine, is like, what if I just tell my kid like something like trying to be funny, and my kid is 4 and doesn't pick up on sarcasm and now has a fear of like grapes? I don't know. Like, and that's the scariest thing because kids can be so influenced. And so like, mad respect for parents. You guys are raising cool kids usually. But like, what is the best way to handle a kid who's curious about the world, about something you're fearful of, or has a like do they like, are there classes for parents, or there's like do psychologists? There are. Okay.
There are parenting classes. Do people take those on their own? Some people do, right? You know, often people end up in parenting classes because of like a court mandate, for example, because of, you know, some sort of issue. Maybe, you know, DHS has to get involved, and then part of the case plan is parents taking parenting classes. But like, ideally, you know, if a parent doesn't really understand, or, you know, a parent to be doesn't understand how to parent, like a parenting class is a good resource. Those definitely do exist.
Okay.
Yeah. Do people take advantage of them? Often not, right? And maybe the people who are the most likely to enroll themselves in that sort of thing are maybe the people who need it the least also.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that as well.
They're just really, really good. Like, people who don't need the parenting classes but still seek them are probably some of the best parents.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like, you know, sometimes if we're looking at like tutoring, for example, sometimes the people who go and like seek out tutoring are probably the people who don't need it as much, and the people who you really want to go get that often don't take advantage of those opportunities. And it's a similar thing.
I wonder, like, are there, and you might know this, are there like psychologists that work primarily on how to break free of these phobias and fears?
Yeah. So a clinical psychologist is going to be somebody who is going to be trained. Well, they could be trained to help you with overcoming a phobia. The most common way is through something called exposure therapy. It's very counterintuitive, right? Because, you know, often if you're afraid of something, you want to avoid it, right? And exposure therapy is literally the opposite of that, where you're actually going to, be exposed to the thing that you're frightened of. It usually kind of steps up through a couple different stages. So you will often start with something known as imaginal exposure, where you just are asked to think about the thing that you're frightened of. And then you might be asked to do some visualizations of that as well. So if it's like a fear of spiders, for example, first you're just asked to, you know, talk about spiders, to think about them. And then a step up from that, you might be asked to kind of visualize a spider. And that can eventually step up to what's called in vivo exposure, which is like real world exposure to the thing that you're frightened of. There's also kind of an interesting development in the last like decade and a half VR therapy. And so there is VR exposure therapy where you can like maybe put on a headset and be exposed to that thing. And it's a nice middle ground between imaginal exposure, just it being in your head, and between that and in vivo exposure. And especially for something that might, technically be maybe a little bit dangerous for you to expose yourself to, that could be a good kind of middle ground.
That was everything on the next part. How do we overcome phobias?
I know.
We have exposure therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, they said
Fear.
CBD.
No, I mean, I do have medication on here. I have medication
I was
on
like,
here.
oh.
And I said fear in the metaverse, which is VR.
Yeah.
We talked about that in that class also, as how it's a part of exposure therapy. Like you just put a headset on and like you're there with it, but not physically. So
See,
fear in the metaverse.
I
is what I said.
don't know if because I did, Emerson Ross was a senior last year, and I did her study where you were like in the hammock with the VR headset on. Emerson, it was a wonderful study. Hated it. I hated not knowing what was in that room with me. And if I was trying to get over a fear of spiders and I had a doctor put a headset on me and tell me, trust, nothing's going to be in this room, I would trust a doctor. But after a while, I'd be like, are we sure that there is nothing in this room with me? And I'm also looking at a spider on a screen in front of me where it's like, I can't look away from it. Like, I don't, like,
It'd
I'm
be
sure.
something they gradually work you up to
Right,
as well.
probably.
Right? And they wouldn't also like try to surprise you with it or
Yeah.
anything. It would definitely be a thing where they talk to you about each step along the way, and so you know exactly what to expect. And they'd build some trust before like jumping to the headset and things.
Right.
Yeah, I was actually watching Criminal Minds. I know this is not like true or factual, but I was watching Criminal Minds. I thought this was very interesting. There was an episode and bodies were showing up, and they all like had different levels of composition and how they had unfortunately passed away. And it was because there was this doctor, a self-proclaimed psychologist, and he was doing exposure therapy. And people were afraid of like water. He would submerge them in water. They were afraid of being buried alive. He would bury them alive. I don't know. I thought it was very interesting because we talked about exposure therapy, and then I was watching Criminal Minds, and I saw someone doing exposure therapy in probably the worst way possible. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting.
How would you do exposure therapy for being buried alive?
I mean, it's one of those things where like maybe you would use VR. That's a possibility, or imagine it. But it's also one of those things that's like, it's not going to happen to you. So do you need to treat it?
Right.
So, often the things that are the most necessary to treat are things that are going to interfere with your daily life if you don't treat them. So if you've got a phobia of like driving, for example, maybe because of a trauma, that's something that you probably do need to treat because you need to be able to drive, or elevators, or flying, or dogs, right? Like all of these things are things you're actually going to encounter. Once we start getting into territory where maybe you aren't going to actually have that experience, like being buried alive, it's quite possible that like maybe it's not a thing that's you're actually needing to treat. If it's a thing that's keeping you up at night, worries about being buried alive, then maybe it does need to be treated. But then that's where like imaginal therapy or VR might come into play.
Well, and I feel like maybe it's not what would work, but maybe like weighted blanket therapy. Maybe it's like the idea of being crushed is also like something that bothers them. And so like slowly putting on like weighted blankets, not like 100 pounds, but like a 25-pound blanket, pretty nice. And it can kind of calm them and kind of make them understand like, it's okay. You're good, bro. Don't be scared of being buried alive, I guess.
Yeah. One of the next things, we don't have much time left because it's been like an hour. I just really love this topic of phobias. Okay. One of the main things is like, why am I afraid? And we talked about, genes, evolution, nature versus nurture, all of that. But what's going on inside your brain that's telling you, you need to be fearful of this? So I just said, our brain is basically an overprotective bodyguard trying to protect us. Do you want to talk more about the role in the brain?
Yeah, it's a little bit. There's several regions that are going to be coming into play for our fear response. I mean, the most obvious one is something called the amygdala, right? So this is a midbrain structure that is tied to our perceptions of fear and anger both. So those two negative emotions. And if we look at people with specific phobias, there is abnormal activity in the amygdala. It seems like things are maybe going off or activating too easily. Like the threshold for activation is too low for those individuals. So that's one area that plays a role. Another area is the hypothalamus, right? So you've got the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is basically like the connection between your brain and your endocrine system. Right? So the release of stress hormones. And for most individuals who have phobias, with a little bit of an exception for that blood injection phobia, which you're going to see, is the activation of a stress response, right? Or, an autonomic nervous system response, a fight or flight response, basically is what's going on in response to whatever that phobic stimulus is. So that's also going to be hypersensitive. And for most people, like, if you're in the presence of something frightening, when you're out of the presence of something frightening, there is that like recovery period, but then the system kind of shuts down. If you're somebody with a specific phobia, that process of that shutting down takes a little bit longer, right? So not only is the system hypervigilant to begin with, it's perceiving threats maybe where there are none, it's hypersensitive to threats, but it also takes a while to kind of key down that system. It's going to take people longer than it normally would be. What else? We've got the prefrontal cortex, right? So this is kind of the area of the brain that houses our risk assessment, for example. So the ability to like talk yourself down from something that's frightening, that takes place in the prefrontal cortex. And for those with phobias, like sometimes that process doesn't help the way it does other individuals. So you can think about this process taking place, for example, if you watch a horror movie and you react to something frightening on the screen, and then after having that initial reaction because of like a jump scare, for example, you talk yourself down from it. That's the prefrontal cortex that's allowing you to kind of do that and tell yourself, okay, I have nothing to actually be worried about. This is fictional, right? It's not going to happen. And again, for folks with phobias, that ability to talk yourself down doesn't function as well. And in fact, sometimes we see situations where people kind of like talk themselves up to a fear as well, where they start engaging in like catastrophic reasoning or like, overestimations of the amount of danger that something poses or the threat that something poses.
Is that spiraling?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of like an anxiety issues, which I guess that is what
Phobia is an anxiety disorder.
You'll see sometimes when it's just super high stress, and like, I'm guilty of it. Like, it feels like everything's kind of crashing in. And so I guess that's kind of what like spiraling kind of is where you're kind of like, this is happening and then this is happening. I got to think about this, and then this is going on, and then this is freaking me out, and then just blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Whenever I was doing research last semester for Dr. Sonia's paper, I noticed that a lot of the studies that talked about phobias, talked about fears and our body's reactions, one of the first steps they would take was inducing fears in rats. And it was interesting because rats had the same like fear response as the human participants did. So like whenever the humans were afraid, obviously those areas in the brain would light up, but they would also, their heart rate would increase. They would begin sweating more. I'm trying to think, they'd either freeze or run because you're afraid, so fight or flight. I'm trying to think what else our body does whenever we're afraid. So our heart rate increases. I think that's one of the biggest ones. But yeah, it was the same exact way in rats and humans. I thought that was very interesting.
Our fear system it's a very ancient one, right? So it's not just our kind of immediate predecessors, but also it's something that like goes way back in evolution, and other species, of course, have that fear response as well.
Right.
Yeah. I was over here taking notes during that. I was like, I want to talk about fight or flight and then rats. But something else that we talked about during class, and something I thought was very interesting is that sometimes whenever we're afraid, we'll take on gender norms or gender stereotypes.
Okay.
So if you're a girl type person, as Dr. Daniels would say, if you're a lady type person, then you're if you're watching it with your dude type person that you're with, then you're gonna like hold on to them and like show you're afraid more, but the dude like person is gonna be like, oh, I'm not afraid.
Yeah, this is nothing.
Yeah,
babe.
so if you're watching it together, it's interesting because you take on those gender type roles. So I thought that was very interesting. We talked about that in class.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a study with high school students where they
Oh.
they showed them horror movies, and then we're like, yep, everybody kind of leans into those traditional gender roles, and then the people who do that actually tended to enjoy the film more also, which was interesting.
Oh.
I think they colloquially called it cuddle theory was the
Aw, that's
the term that they used.
I feel like whenever I'm watching a horror movie, I'm gonna react to it, but I don't want anyone touching me or near me because then that's just gonna make the jump scare worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like I'm gonna talk the entire way through every single movie. I'm gonna talk about the movie the entire time.
I'm always on the edge of my seat during horror films. Like you can ask my boyfriend, like 2 years ago, wouldn't even touch a horror movie. And then I watched, I mean, I like the Blair Witch Project. That was a fun one. Then I watched Midsummer, fell in love. I love psychological horror films.
That's my favorite.
Amazing. And I'm on the edge of my seat. Like I'm not laying back in bed. I'm like sitting, holding my like bedpost, like leaning forward towards my TV. Just like, what's going to happen next? And if there's a horror movie, probably hit my head on my bed. But like, it's still like, whew. It's fun. I've never really been the like, oh, I'm so scared. It's like, shut up, I'm watching the movie. Like, but I don't know.
That's my favorite genre actually.
Psychological horror?
Psychological horror. So Midsummer, Hereditary.
I'm watching that tonight.
Mother's my favorite horror movie, probably of all time.
That's
Which people don't
with Jennifer
classify
Lawrence.
as a horror movie, but it is.
That's a horror movie.
Yes.
Oh, it definitely.
That's
is.
a scary movie.
It's a scary movie.
But I remember whenever I was teaching that class, one of the first things I asked them, I was like, what's your favorite horror movie? And then they told me. And I told them mine. And there was this one student. He was like, he's like barely younger than me. But he was like, that's not a horror movie. I said, yes. You're going to find out that is a horror movie.
He said Mother wasn't?
Yeah. Because I basically described, he was like, what was that? What's that? And I described the premise. He's like, that's not a horror movie. I said, go watch it. It is. And then I told him Midsummer. He's like, that's not a horror movie. And I was like, there are different genres of horror. Dr. Miller's going to tell you more about this. It's just not blood, guts, and sex. There's a lot more to it. And I like the lot more to it part.
Yeah, the deeper. Oh, Midsummer's so good.
It's so good.
I am watching Hereditary tonight. I was like, I kind of want to watch a horror film tonight. We were going to talk about this. And I realized like I hadn't watched Hereditary yet, and it's on Netflix. And so I was like, guess I'll watch that.
I recently got my boyfriend to watch Midsummer with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked about this, I think, with
That's
Dr.
a crazy
Daniels.
movie to watch with your boyfriend.
Well, he was like, you suggest the movie. And I was like, let's watch Midsummer. I was like, you're going to love this movie. I think we actually talked about Midsummer with Dr. Daniels.
We did.
Yeah. And
Oh, what did we talk about?
We talked about how like it's an awful character, but you still feel for them. I think that's what we talked about.
Yes.
We talked about how you look at the people you're watching the movie with to see how they react to it.
Yes.
And it was different scenes of the boyfriend.
Yes.
And whenever he unfortunately passed away, like you would look and see the reactions to people that you're with. That's something we talked about.
I did, because I watched that with my freshman roommate like 3 weeks into being here at Lyon. We were like, let's watch Midsummer. And like very different reactions to the people in the room. And I was like, and like based on like gender, where they were raised, like different reactions all the way around.
Yeah. That's how it typically is with horror movies. Like you always, and like movies in general, like you're going to have your favorite character and you're going to have your character that you dislike. Oh, your character that you dislike. I feel like one of the main like things I hear like contrasting is The Boys. Have y'all seen The Boys?
I have. I'm not a fan. But.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People like whenever I watch that, oh, who's your favorite character? Starlight.
Yeah.
Starlight. And then like, oh, mine's Homelander. I'm like, oh,
okay.
need to stay
Call
away
it red
from you.
flag.
I'm going to stay far away from you. That's one of the main like examples I can think of. They're like, yeah, my favorite character is Homelander. And I'm like, oh, why?
Yeah.
What happened that took you to that?
Well, and I had somebody tell me like liking Homelander is like somebody liking, oh my gosh, Omni-Man from Invincible. I'm like, no, that's completely different. But
I
it's
don't
that
like
same
Omni-Man either.
like premise together is like
Yeah.
this like.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Omni-Man was good for a little bit, and I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to get into like a whole like analysis of Omni-Man versus Homelander. But yeah, Homelander is
That's a crazy episode.
Homelander is not a good character, and
At all.
I feel like the type of characters that are your favorite and that you like is if you see this powerful man that, you know, literally does not take no for an answer and just destroys everyone in his path, you're like, oh yeah, he's a badass. But like you're more like me and you're like, oh, you know, there's this girl and, you know, she's kind of quiet and stuff like that, but she pushes back on the patriarchy.
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, I like her better. She appeals to my type of character I like more. I'm scared of people that Homelander's the kind of character they relate to.
Any other character, like the boy is not like. There's a bunch of characters that are huge red
Pick
flags.
anybody.
Anybody, even if it's the worst of the worst, just not Homelander.
Yeah. Anybody like him, I never hear anyone say the Deep, but he's another one I'm like, oof. But no one ever says.
I'd rather someone say the Deep than Homelander, in my opinion. And he said
I would too.
he's done some crazy things.
No, I would too, honestly. But that's like a whole entire side tangent.
That's a good episode idea. Write that down.
But yeah, one of the last things I wanted to wrap up and talk about was our favorite horror movies, because like phobia, horror kind of go together. And then I want to talk about like the Grab Bag movie that Dr. Miller does every year for his Psychology of Horror.
What is that?
I'll let you explain it.
Okay.
So it's a fun assignment. So the very last assignment that people do in Core 100, in my section of Core 100, is they'll get a random film assigned to them that they have to watch, and then do a review of that film. And so typically what I'll do is I'll go, it's become harder in recent years to do this because no one sells DVDs anymore. But what I used to do is kind of go through like the $5 bin in Walmart and like pick out a bunch of like mostly low budget horror. There was some good stuff mixed in there as well, and then have people watch and then do like post a video review of that random horror film, and that was always a fun experience.
I really
crazy
liked
stuff out there that you otherwise wouldn't watch.
I think it's a really cool assignment. I really like that assignment. I think I had the worst movie possible.
Which one?
That's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. What was that movie called? It was like a werewolf. It was a werewolf. There was a werewolf orgy scene.
Oh my god!
Was it The Howling? Is that
The Howling.
Yeah.
The Howling.
What?
That's what it was called. That was one of the, it was entertaining though. I mean, I had a lot to write about. I had a lot to write about. We had to write a paper over it, and I was like, oh, but I don't get anything boring.
You didn't get anything boring.
Yeah, I hope I have something I can talk about. I did. Yeah, there was a werewolf orgy. There was terrible practical effects, because no CGI.
Yeah.
Terrible practical effects. But I'm just thinking, if I were during this time period, I'd look at this and be like, that's terrifying. Or that's sexy. I don't know who's thinking that.
Wait,
Might also be a red flag.
Yeah, that could be a red flag.
I watched it in with a group of people because I didn't have a PlayStation or anything at the time because I was a freshman. That's before I met my boyfriend that bought it for me.
That is a crazy first movie to watch.
I was like, I don't have anything to put the CD in. Can we watch it on your PlayStation? And so there was a group of us and they're watching it. They're like, who the hell picked this movie out? I was like, I have to watch it for an assignment.
Which teacher? Like, yeah.
No.
I was like, it's for my year 1 class. They're like, who gave you this movie?
So is The Howling in your top 3 favorite horror films?
No, it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But I had a lot to write about, though.
What is your top 3 horror films, though?
My top 3, Mother, Midsummer, Quiet Place.
That's almost my list.
I feel like if you talk to any psychology major, they're going to be that 3.
Yeah, because I like... now it's hard, because like definitely I love Midsummer. It's a great film. When I watch Hereditary might be up there, because my boyfriend told me I might really like that one.
It's good.
I really like A Quiet Place, just because I love the whole production of that and how they were very accommodating to the deaf community, and like somebody who was deaf was in that movie.
And she saves the day.
It's so much fun. And I love The Blair Witch Project, but a very good honorable mention. Not a great film at all, but it's called Tusk. It makes me cry all the time.
That's a terrible movie.
Yes. It makes you cry?
It makes me so sad.
That movie makes me want to throw up.
I just feel so sad for him. And then, like, he's at the end with
him out of his misery.
For anyone who doesn't know, that's a movie where a man is turned into a walrus.
Yeah,
yes.
a walrus.
Yes.
But it's, no, listen, it ends where he's in a zoo and he doesn't know who he is. And he's just turned completely psychologically and physiologically into a walrus. And it's so sad. No, like, I know it's supposed to be scary. It's not scary at all for me.
It's not that scary, no.
It's nasty.
It's just nasty. It just always makes me so upset because I'm like,
What got me was the person that turned him to the walrus, his backstory of why he wanted to turn him to the walrus, because he fell in love with the walrus and then ate him.
Okay.
So he's like, let me make this person into a walrus so I can fall in love and consummate our marriage, because they were getting married.
Yeah, I know.
That's a terrible movie. That's
and like
down there.
the ending of that whole story, like, yes, that guy's whole story, And let me say, I don't condone bestiality or eating people, but it was so sad when he was like, he was so upset when his walrus friend died, and I was really upset about that.
Because he ate him.
Because he ate him. But it was still sad. And I don't know why. It always makes me upset. And like, not in like a, oh, this is so disturbing, or oh, it's like, oh, like all these people are so sad right now. And I just wish they all had therapy instead of their own coping mechanisms. But no, the ending breaks my heart when they throw the fish to him and he's just like eating it like a normal
his
walrus.
best friend being with his girlfriend.
Yeah, that too. It's like, and of course, like I'm not asking the girlfriend to stay with him as a walrus, but like, because that's not okay. But it's so sad, and like that probably might get red flagged a little bit, but that's just sad.
I feel like my disgust emotions take over for that movie, and I can feel nothing else but disgust.
Not even for the guy turned into the walrus?
I mean, obviously I feel remorse for him and empathy for him, but I'm just like looking at the premise behind that movie.
Right.
Why would you sit down and be like, I'm gonna write a movie about a man, a serial that I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, a serial person. That
we're not on YouTube Kids.
Serial unaliver that
hopefully not.
Hopefully we're not on YouTube Kids.
Yeah, a serial unaliver that kidnaps people, takes pieces of their skin, and makes walrus.
Yeah. When you say it like that, it's really weird. But
It's a weird movie.
Well, I want to know your 3 favorite, because maybe I haven't seen them yet, and it might be worth a watch.
Hard to narrow it down to 3. I would say Pan's Labyrinth is definitely the first.
Okay.
It's an excellent film, very heart-wrenching, very well made. That's Guillermo del Toro. Second one would probably be, I really like It Comes at Night.
I've heard of that one.
It's a great film. I forget who the director is. It's an A24 horror film about this
Love A24.
post-pandemic. It's not necessarily the COVID, but a pandemic that they have, and it's this family who's like holed up in this little house in the woods, and other people come into like their area, and they don't know whether they can trust them or not, and it's this like back and forth about like how much can we trust other people, and sort of like the boundaries of society have crumbled. Like, can we rebuild things like that? Great film.
Okay.
Very frightening for largely it's a psychological horror movie. There's not
I've
really
heard
a
that
lot of
movie.
like gore or anything with it. So that one's great. And then I'd probably put Hereditary on there. That has one of the toughest sequences to watch though. In the
lordy lord.
Middle of that film.
Yeah.
So a thing that will definitely stick with you. Period.
Okay.
Don't eat while you're watching it.
Yeah.
Don't eat. Okay, I'll eat before, because I'm going to a study night first. And I'm gonna watch it.
You'll know it when you see it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And it happens. So I don't want to spoil it for you, obviously.
Of course.
But it happens so quickly. You're like, what? You're like, did that just happen? Am I dreaming? And then like that's like the entire premise of the second half of the movie. I think it happens pretty early on.
Yeah, I think end of the first act is
okay.
Like
yeah,
40 minutes in maybe.
Yeah, and like it sets this character. Okay, I'm gonna spoil it. I don't want to, but that's how it's like. I'm trying my best
because I know a lot about it, so I might know what you're talking about.
It's setting this character up to be the main character,
right?
It's setting this character up to be a huge part of the plot, and they are a huge part of the plot, just in another sense. But then that happens. You're like, where the hell is this gonna go now? You're like, what's gonna happen now? And then it goes completely.
That was not as big of a spoiler as you thought.
I was trying my best not to spoil it.
That's just like
probably not a spoiler. That's good though.
That was actually a really good way to describe it.
Thank you. But if you thought Tusk was sad,
oh,
if you thought Tusk was a hard watch, it is a hard watch. But
it just makes anything that has it where like people are taken in, like not killed. I feel like I feel upset when people are murdered, but I think it's more sad for me when they're like psychologically and physically tortured, because it's like they could have been saved the pain by either been left alone or just straight up killed, which sounds awful, but I think it's the thing that's why also like Human Centipede makes me sad, because it's like,
my God, Hannah.
Not for that, but like because they're just being tortured and it makes me sad. I couldn't finish the movie because it was so sad. Yeah, I got maybe 20 minutes in and I was like, nope, I can't do this. This is how I felt when I watched Tusk, and it made me sad. So I can't do that. I don't condone that kind of stuff. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's sad. Like,
if like looking at the participants that are having something awful happen to them, obviously I'm going to be like, oh, that's so sad. Like, that's awful. But the entire time I'm just thinking, who sat down and was like,
Who
I'm
wrote
gonna
this?
make
Yes. Like,
More than one, too.
and yeah, when there's like 6.
Too
There's,
many.
There's too many.
You have to like
Six
bootleg
too
them
many.
too, I think.
You do have to bootleg the later ones.
I watched it whenever it was still on Netflix before it got taken down.
It was on Netflix.
I was young.
That was a long time
Like I told
ago.
you, unlimited internet access. And I was like, oh my God. I watched like 10 minutes, 20 minutes of it. And I realized what was going on.
Yeah, and that's why like the Saw movies don't really get me, but it does kind of get me because it's like it's the same premise. But
yeah.
you want to do a conclusion before I say another crazy thing?
Anything else I want to talk about? So I was going to wrap it up with, do we have any phobias of our own? But we already talked about that in the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, favorite horror movies, grab bag movies. Oh, I was going to say this earlier, but then I forgot. My mom's afraid of clowns. We talked about Pennywise. My mom's afraid of clowns. She instilled on us at a very young age, clowns are scary. You stay away from clowns. And there's a picture of me, like as a child, because I've heard that growing up. There's a picture of me as a little kid, and I'm at the circus, and my aunt took me, and she was like, oh, go take a picture with the clown. And the clown's like right here, and I was all the way over there, and I was crying, and the clown was just smiling, because my mom instilled in me, stay away from clowns. Clowns are scary. And then you have my aunt saying, get over there, take a picture with the clown.
That's kind
And
of
something
funny.
we learned about today is that kids will do basically whatever you say and not question it. And I did it, and I cried.
And I did it.
Yeah, and then my dad's afraid of needles and shots. So, but he, like, throughout my life, I heard, like, that, like, needles and shots. So, like, I'm now afraid of needles and shots and bloods. It's not a phobia. 'Cause I don't encounter them in everyday life. But when I get my blood taken, or the worst thing at the doctor's when they, like, prick your finger.
Yeah, that's
Whenever you have a
sad.
temperature, they got to prick your finger. I pass out every single time. I've passed out since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Like, I look at the blood and I see the blood being pulled out of my finger. I'm going to pass out. But yeah, that was other little side notes. What were you going to say?
No.
I
What are
thought
you
you
gonna
said
say?
you had something else to say.
I did have something else to say, dude. Like
Close on Tusk is not a recommendation.
no,
Human
no,
Centipede.
no. I would not recommend
watch
it.
Tusk.
Don't watch it. I was just saying it made me sad.
Or Human Centipede.
Or yeah,
Pan's Labyrinth is good though. Watch that one.
the first two he mentioned, I actually have not seen. I know of them, but I
Yeah,
haven't
me
seen
too.
them. So if you want to watch it this week, you can watch it with me because I'll be watching around the same time. But those are good. Our 3 recommendations minus my like extra sad one. That one's not good. But the 3 ones we recommended are good ones. We can put like them somewhere on the bio or on the screen somewhere. Just be like, oh, these are all of our movies we like.
Yeah. Anything A24.
Yes.
I'm tuned in. I'm sat.
I'm sad.
Yeah.
You
I'm gonna
got me
watch
sat.
one of the Stranger ones.
Stranger
God,
Things?
I could write. Here's my thing. I like movies where you put a piece of paper and a pen in front of me, and I can write so much about it. And that's why I like A24 movies, is because I can analyze that until there's nothing left. And one of the main movies, it's weird, but like you can analyze everything. I think it's called Lamb. That is
an interesting one.
Yes, it's weird, but you could go so many different routes with how you see that. And that's why I like it, because it is psychologically, you're like, what's going on? It talks about grief, it talks about child loss, all that. I recommend it if you like analyzing movies.
Yeah.
But it's not one of my favorites.
We recommend anything, most anything A24. I don't want to say everything.
It's mostly a safe bet. Yeah.
A24,
Solid films.
solid films. Those are good.
Some exceptions.
Some.
Asterisk.
asterisk exceptions, and also whatever they make in the future. We can't speak on that yet. I am excited because apparently there's a film coming out next year from A24, another psychological thriller.
Nice.
It's just untitled, undirected either. They just want to make another one.
Yeah, Hereditary, Lamb. I think that's what it's called, Lamb. But
Lamb, yeah, that's what it's called.
it's a good movie. But yeah, anytime that we were in that class and we had to, like Dr. Miller said, we had options to choose from, I was always like Mother, Quiet's Place, Hereditary, Midsummer, and everybody else was like Saw, Evil Dead,
American Psycho.
Krampus. I had to conduct that one. And I'm like, can we get into the nit and gritty that we can write a lot about? I don't know. I just have a different taste in horror movies.
Yeah, Krampus is an interesting one.
It's an okay movie, but here's the thing. If you are setting up a character to survive and then you kill them off, or you completely... Sorry. you completely change the plot like Krampus did. I'm
I got lost in that movie.
like, Talk to Me. Hated that movie. Mm-hmm. And it's surprising because it's like a psychological horror. But I hated it because all that character development, all that for nothing. And then you just twist the plot.
Yeah. Some plot twists are too twisty.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts, Dr. Miller?
I don't think so. I think that's
Pretty
movie
good.
recommendations are a good end.
Yeah, the movie recommendations are a good end. We'll put them on the screen. We can like do a little like bloop, 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 all over the screen.
Not Tusk or
Not
Human
Tusk.
Not
Okay.
Or
yeah.
Human Centipede.
We'll just put
Also
those
not
on there
that
with
one.
big red X. Not that one. I was just saying it made me sad,
We
guys.
believe it.
We believe it. Yeah, bleep it out.
Nobody's gonna know.
Nobody will know
movie.
what it is unless they listen to our description and they
Yeah.
know what it is. But do you want to close the episode since you did all the hard work for it?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Miller, for
Thank you
coming
for
on.
having
Of course. I talked a lot in this episode, and I did not mean to, but this is like one of my
It's your passion.
niche topics
Yeah.
that I really am interested in. I'm writing another paper for Dr. Sonia on phobias again. Thankfully, she let me do it again. But yeah, I just want to thank Dr. Miller for coming on and Hannah for being an amazing co-host.
Oh,
And I
thanks.
think that's everything.
Yeah.
See you guys next week. Not next week.
Next week.
Week after.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
With an undisclosed theme or like discussion because we don't know.
Maybe
it yet.
movies.
Maybe movies. Maybe we'll talk more about horror films.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.